First step of getting your PowerHouse installed into your truck is locating the fuse box. On both your Hemi and your Cummins models in the 2010 and newer Ram heavy duty trucks, you're going to have the fuse box here on that driver front corner. All we need to do to get this off is release these two tabs right here. So we'll just do that. And then this is kind of on a little hinge, and then you can just kind of pull it to the side here and these clips will release. What we'll do next is take this over to the bench and we'll talk about how to align the PowerHouse with this panel itself, and then we'll drill our holes and actually get the PowerHouse mounted, and then we'll come back and do all of our actual wiring inside of the engine bay. All right, so at this point we have removed our fuse box cover from the inside of the engine bay in our truck, and now it's time to basically put this on the bench like we have now and drill the holes so we can get it mounted in that fuse box cover. As we've talked about in our PowerHouse overview video, the reason we mount it here is because across the 4th and 5th gen trucks, there's plenty of space to do it here. Additionally, this little piece of plastic here was $25 at our local dealership. So it's a very easily and affordable replaceable part should you ever want to get rid of this in the future. When the PowerHouse shows up to you guys, it's going to look like this. This is our upfitter switch version. It's fully assembled, it's ready to go, and we're going to use this as our template to actually drill on the fuse box. So when I'm orienting this and looking at everything, I want to make sure that the two release tabs that exist on the cover itself are facing me. That's the bottom of the fuse box. If that doesn't make enough sense for you, the fuse quite literally should be in the direction where the prongs face you as well. So I'm going to set that down. The little notch is another indicator. That should be in the top left, just like it is when it's installed in the truck. Then this panel right here is pretty much the exact same size as this risen portion, and we want to line up this top corner on both sides, and that's going to be where we want this to sit when we're actually doing our drilling. So I'm just going to stand above it, I'm going to look at it, get it lined up visually. I can kind of run my hands down the edges to make sure all the lines match up. I really like where that is sitting. All I'm gonna do then at that point is just apply a little bit of downward pressure. I'm gonna take our drill with a 7/32 drill bit and run it through, and I'm just gonna scuff the plastic lightly with the drill bit in all of the open locations. And you'll see that the wire on this upfitter is covering this hole. We'll have to unbolt that here quickly. I'll do that in just a second. You'll follow the same process for both our Garmin Power Switch and our Switch Pro SP9100 units. The mounting holes are all of the same. We are more or less just using this on the upfitter kit because that's what's going in my truck. But the mounting holes are going to be the same on both the Garmin Power Switch and the Switch Pro, and it will quite literally just lay in place like this. You'll use the plate itself to mark your holes, scuff that plastic, and then remove this, and then we'll show you a close-up of drilling those holes next. We have the panel here. We use this to mark our holes, and then I removed that and finished it with the 7/32 drill bit, just with the panel itself. The mounting holes here are pretty purposefully placed. If you flip this over, you get all of this gray writing. This is your diagram for your fuses, and you probably can't see it super well on the camera, but the hole up here in the corner and this hole do not interfere with our diagram at all. And then the two mounting holes on the side barely touch F33 and K3, but not enough to actually interfere with what you may or may not be trying to diagnose. So that's why the mounting holes are in the location that they are in. But I digress. So I'll flip this back over here, move that out of the way. You can see I've got my mounting hardware and the tools we need for this next step. So what you have here is some longer M5 button head bolts with an Allen key drive, and then you've got 4 flat washers, 4 nylon locking nuts, 4 aluminum spacers, and then you have 8 rubber bonded sealing washers. This is what we're going to be using to keep all of the dust, debris, water, and anything else outside of the very important fuse box itself. We have tested this with a pressure washer for the sake of not destroying an $83,000 truck that would be yours. We tried to destroy mine, but to no avail, because these washers really do a job like they're supposed to. So I'm just going to push this hardware out of the way here so I can get my workspace in the middle. And then we're going to set our first one up. So we're going to take a bolt, we're going to take a flat washer, I'm going to go ahead and run this through our panel. And then I'm going to grab a spacer, and then I'm going to grab a rubber-backed washer. In this instance, we want the metal side to be up, the rubber side to be down. And we're gonna go ahead and take that, and we're gonna get it lined up to our corresponding hole, which is this guy. So we're gonna go ahead and pinch that whole assembly together. And then we're gonna grab one more rubber washer, orient this so you guys can see a little better. We're gonna go metal side down, rubber side up. Basically what we're doing is we're sandwiching the plastic fuse box cover between 2 pieces of rubber. And then from there, I'm going to grab a nylon lock nut. I'm gonna go ahead and thread that on here by hand. And then I'm going to take a 3mm Allen key, get that into the bolt head, and then I'm going to take an 8mm socket, which I have connected to a screwdriver or a 1/4-inch drive, basically making this a nut driver. And then I'm just going to go ahead and get this tightened down. And all I want to do at this time is snug it. I don't want to put too much force on it because we obviously still have some other bolts to get in. So I'm going to repeat that process 3 more times for the remaining mounting holes. Once again, that's bolts, flat washer, run that through the panel, aluminum spacer, and then metal side up, rubber side down, sealing washer. And then you're going to run that through the fuse box cover itself. And then we're going to go rubber side up, metal side down, sealing washer once again, and then a nylon lock nut. Go ahead and tighten that down, do it 2 more times, and then we'll come back to you for the next step. Camera guy Grant said that he didn't want me to confuse you guys, so we're going to do a little bit more of a close-up, specifically talking about the washers. So these rubber sealing washers that are on the top and the bottom of the fuse cover, I just want to make sure you guys are orienting them in the correct manner. So the PowerHouse is going to sit flat like this in your engine bay. When you're looking down on it, you want to make sure that that rubber backed washer is rubber side down to the plastic. So rubber to plastic in both instances. So stainless steel up, rubber down, and then when you flip it over to the inside, it's going to be stainless steel down, rubber side up. The rule of thumb here is if rubber is touching plastic, you are good to go. You do not want the metal to be crushing the plastic. You want the rubber to be crushing the plastic. So we're sandwiching the actual cover itself in that rubber, protecting all of the internals from the elements. So just a quick little close-up there. Rubber side pinches plastic. Now that we have the PowerHouse mounted to the fuse cover itself, we've got all of our waterproof washers in here, we're ready to put this back in the truck. This part is going to be a little bit tricky because this is going to be pretty close to the battery when you're hinging it in. You can kind of force it into place, but you don't want to like whack it because it's plastic and it is going to be semi-brittle. So just go ahead. I'm going to clear out my wires because I've already had a PowerHouse in here for prototyping purposes for a while. So I just want to make sure those are out of the way. And then all I want to do is tongue in those tabs here on the back of the fuse box. And then I can kind of rock this down into place. And once I have that, just go ahead and click it in place. And then we'll talk about all of our wiring next. With the fuse box cover and the PowerHouse reinstalled into the truck here, everything's locked in place. We can talk about making our connections first. So the first is going to be our positive wire coming from the battery and going into the circuit breaker itself. First things first, this circuit breaker needs to be in the off or tripped position. So if it looks like this, go ahead and press that red button and make sure that you can clearly read the reset word here on this little yellow tab. Once again, if it looks like this, make sure you go ahead and trip that breaker. After that, we're going to go ahead and get the nut that's off the back here. I just have the nut on it currently, but this will have a nut and a lock washer, so make sure you get both of those items off. Then you're going to take the 90-degree side of your power wire that we provide to you, go ahead and put that over your terminal, and then drop on the lock washer, and then drop on your nuts. We'll go ahead and hand tighten this here, get it as snug as we can, and then we'll take our 10mm socket and we will go ahead and get that nice and snug, just kind of holding that in place. We want to make sure that this is square to the system here. So once it's in place, give it a little snug here, doesn't need a ton of torque, and then we'll just wiggle this, make sure that it's not loose on the post, because that could cause power issues if it is. So give that one little snug, and you can see that when I shake that wire, it moves the entire fuse box cover because there is a little bit of play from Mopar. After that, we'll just put that little rubber cap back onto our threads, make sure that's pushed down, and we'll go ahead and check the one that's already done for you that we send you as well. And then we can talk about the connection to the battery. So again, making sure that this is tripped, we're going to set our other side of our power wire onto one of the available posts. Different trim levels and different engine configurations are going to have different posts available or unavailable. So we're going to swing the camera around so we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. So for reference, my truck is a 2022 limited trim level with the 6.7 Cummins. So my battery looks like this. On an install that we did with a Switch Pro model on a 2022 Power Wagon, the battery also looked like this. But again, depending on your trim level and engine configuration, you might have something that looks a little bit different. But the common theme that we need to look for here is identifying our available posts. You can see that this one is already set up. Again, this has been installed once for prototyping, and we used this available M8 stud, and we'll send you an M8 nut for this as well, because we did not have a nut on here from the factory. And it's very similar to the circuit breaker. You're just going to put the lead over the post, and then you'll get that tightened down with the provided M8 nut that we send to you. That being said, if you don't have an available post, you can also piggyback off of one of these other posts. So you can see over here, I've got another lead, and this is actually for a MPPT solar charge controller that I have for a solar panel. And this was already a used post by another accessory in the vehicle, and I just piggybacked off it. So if that's what you have to end up doing, that is completely fine. Just reuse the hardware and make sure that you have enough thread exposed. You don't want this hanging on by 1 or 2 turns. You want to make sure that the stud is at least to the top of the bolt like this one is. So use your best judgment here, but you should have at least one available post, and that's the one that we prefer you guys to install your power wire to on the battery. Okay, so our next step in getting all of this connected to the actual truck is getting a ground. So we need to utilize our common ground here, which is located in the middle of the PowerHouse, and then we are going to connect that to a body ground here on the side of the fender. So what I'm going to do first is go ahead and loosen this nut. This is going to be a 13mm, but it should be hand loose to start. So we'll go ahead and get this threaded off of the stud here. Again, being sure not to drop it as we get towards the end. Just set that to the side, and then also pull off the lock washer that comes with it as well. Again, setting that to the side. And then we'll go ahead and put on our provided ground wire, and then we'll drop on the lock washer and the nut, and we're just going to snug this up by hand here. We want to have some flex. Now you'll see that one end of this ground wire is at a 90-degree kind of compared to the other lug that's on this side, and that's because we're going to this stud that comes off the wall of the fender. Sorry for the wires in the way. Like I've said a couple times in this video, I've already had this installed, so we just want to make sure that we're going over this as thoroughly as possible for you guys. So we're going to take this and break that loose. Once we do that, we'll go ahead and hand thread this off. Don't drop this one. I know I keep saying that, but I dropped this one and it was a hassle and a half to get back. So be very careful as you thread this off. And then once you get towards the end here, just go ahead and grab that and once again set it to the side. Making sure to stay out of the way of existing wires like I have, I'm just going to go ahead and put this tucked against the wall of the truck, and I'm going to slide it over that stud in very similar fashion to everything else that we have done. And then I'm going to very carefully start threading that nut back onto the stud on the wall. Just take your time with this. Again, do not drop this. I'm having a bit of difficulty getting that first thread to catch, so just be patient with it. Okay, got that to catch, so I'll go ahead and in similar fashion, we're just going to get that started by hand here as well. And then because these wires have to go over here in a second, I'm going to go ahead and kind of get them into position. So what do we want to do next? Well, we want to try to get this in a way that looks nice and clean. The 4 gauge that we're using here is pretty thick, but it's still pliable to a certain extent. I'm going to rest that 4 gauge on top of this plastic clamp that supports the fuse box. You'll see it when you guys are in here. So with this one pushed all the way down, I'm going to go ahead and tighten my bolt here for the ground on the body first. And again, this does not have to be hero tight, just snug enough, and that's good. We're not going anywhere. We know we have a good connection here. And then our next one to do here is going to be the one, and I'm just basically trying to get this so this lead is coming straight off of the common ground that we're using on the truck. And then with that 13mm socket we have, just gonna go ahead, put a couple cranks on it, make sure that the lock washer is sufficiently crushed, and then this is snug to the actual unit itself. From there, we can kind of take this, we're gonna bend this lug here just a little bit, and I'm just gonna push down on it. You do not need a ton of force. And we're just bending this out of the way. Again, kind of making everything nice and neat like the PowerHouse system is known for. At this point, you're installed, you're done. We're gonna talk about some connections with your accessories as it pertains to the upfitter unit, and then we're gonna talk about the PowerHouse and Garmin as well, even though we don't have an example here, because at this point the installation is very, very similar, but I do wanna make a couple of notes that are specific to each different one. So this segment here is going to be broken up into 3 parts. We're going to talk specifically about connections on the upfitter version of the PowerHouse, and then we'll also discuss some intricacies of the Garmin Power Switch and also the Switch Pro SP9100 units that we offer as well. So starting off on this side of our upfitter system, we're going to talk about the actual terminal block itself. This is where you're going to set up all of your triggers from your factory upfitter switches. So we've used the provided 12 gauge wire to extend those to here, and then we've gone ahead and added the ring terminals that are also provided to you. You can see I've color coded them here. That way I know what switches are what as far as it pertains to the plug on the firewall itself. So just using a drill here and a number 2 drive, I'm gonna go ahead and break these screws out and start connecting these accessories. You need like 24 inch-pounds, which is 2 foot-pounds, to connect these to actual Blue Sea spec. So I'm just using an impact here, and once it's snug, I'm giving it like one more push and that's it. So these aren't gonna go anywhere. You do not need to give them a ton of force. And I'm just gonna go down the line here. And obviously, I'm probably gonna be doing this a little bit quicker than you because all of my wire already exists in place. This might take you a little bit longer, but the principle's still the same. So just going down the line here. Okay. So I'm connecting switch number 4 now. Getting a little short here on the wire. It looks like it's snagged on something, so just pull that over here. Get it into position. There we go, that's a little bit better. All right, so we've got these all hooked up. You can see I only have 4. The Ram trucks come with 6 upfitter switches if you opt for that accessory from the factory. But I don't have accessories for switch 5 and 6 at this time. And switch 5 and 6 are on a different plug on the firewall anyway, so I've just opted to leave those out. That's fine. These are basically just dead jumpers is the best way to think of it. They don't need to be hooked up if you don't want them to, and we'll discuss how to hook up the other side, which would actually be your positive triggers for your accessories next. All right, so I've got a bunch of other leads that are poked up in here. Again, I'm doing this a lot quicker than you guys will because my truck's already been wired, so I'm just kind of replacing what was already there. So next we're going to talk about the positive triggers from our accessories. I've got one for my XL linkable light bar on the bumper. I've got a second one here for some ditch lights, and then I have a third one for some chase lights off the back of the truck as well. Similar process using that number 2 Phillips. We're going to go ahead and just start taking these screws out here and then running them through our leads and then tightening them back in. Again, just snugging them. We don't need to go super tight on them. And then just following that same process through here. So I'll stop talking and we'll do maybe a little hyperlapse. Positive triggers are hooked up. Wanted to talk about something though. You can see that I don't have an accessory hooked up to 4. Again, that's okay. I wired all of these at once because it came out of one plug, but we'll add a number 4 when we get there. For now, we can just leave that dead. And if you accidentally hit on auxiliary switch 4, it's not going to short out or spark or cause a fire or anything like that. It's just quite simply a dead circuit. Next we're going to do is make sure that we are grounding those accessories. So same process, number 2 Phillips. Pull those screws out, put your ground leads on there with the provided ring terminals, and get everything stuck down. So last but not least, we're going to talk about the auxiliary fuse block here for other items. So I've got a couple of leads here. One is for power in my bed, another one is for a GMRS radio, and then I have an outlet that's additional inside of the truck for a Dometic refrigerator, and then again one more bed power. I have bed power on both sides of the truck. So we're going to go ahead, very similar fashion to everything else. Number 2 Phillips, and we're going to go ahead and connect those to wherever you want, making sure that there are no fuses installed at this time. So go ahead, connect those positive triggers with no fuses installed, get everything tightened down. At this point, all of our connections are made, everything from the auxiliary switches coming from the truck to our accessory power, our accessory ground, and then we have some other ground and positive triggers for other things that require auxiliary fuses. With everything installed here, we can go ahead and put our fuses in to their locations. So this accessory requires a 15 amp, so I'll go ahead and put that in. This accessory also requires a 15 amp. Go ahead and make sure that's in. I'm leaving this one out for now because I don't actually have anything hooked up to it, so I'm going to skip this one. But then my last accessory also requires 15 amps. So I'll go ahead and put that in here. And at this point, our fuses are in and they're good to go. And right now we can go ahead and provide power to the system by tripping our circuit breaker. So that is now taking power from the battery, sending it through our power wire and into the fuse block. So if I wanted to turn on any of these accessories, I could do so at this time. The fuse box in place, so if there is a short, this will blow, and if the whole system goes over 100 amps, this will trip. That is the purpose of this guy here. So we're set to jet at this point. I'm going to talk a little bit about the specifics of the Switch Pro and the Garmin Power Switch next. At this point, our entire install of this is done. We've got everything connected, we've tested everything that we want to test, we know that stuff is working. But there are some differences between the upfitter system and the Switch Pro and Garmin Power Switch units. But the Garmin Power Switch and the Switch Pro SP9100 versions of the PowerHouse are going to be nearly identical in terms of how they get installed. So let's talk about the differences. Well, for one, you're going to have two power wires. You're going to have one power wire for your Switch Pro or Power Switch. You're going to have one power wire for your auxiliary fuse block. Instead of using a circuit breaker like this, it's going to use a dual post mounted studded fuse. That will still mount to the engine, or I'm sorry, the battery in the same fashion that our first power cable did. However, instead of connecting the power cable directly to the battery, you're going to connect that dual post mount to the battery, and then you'll connect your respective power cables to the two different studs. And we're actually going to send it to you with the power cables already installed on the stud, so all you have to do is make that same connection here on the battery. Your ground wire is going to be unchanged. You're not going to have a terminal block on those versions since you're directly connecting it to something else. So a few things that are different, but we'll talk about some intricacies and film some videos as time goes on, but this installation is going to be pretty much the exact same regardless of what system you buy from us, as long as you're actually installing this on a RAM. Our Ford and GMC versions will be different, but this one will cover all three versions of the PowerHouse from GODZ Manufacturing as it pertains to a 2010 and newer Ram HD truck.